have a great night and learn a lot about wildlife rehabilitation. So I'm going to go ahead and introduce our speaker at this point. Halley Buckanoff, who will be joining us here today, is the director of the Schindler Wildlife Rehabilitation Center at the North Carolina Zoo in Asheboro, North Carolina. So the Wildlife Rehabilitation Center, much like Nebraska Wildlife Rehab, provides free veterinary care to injured and orphaned native wildlife with the intent of releasing the animals back to the wild. Halley is originally from Weston, Connecticut, and was previously an ornithological field biologist. Currently, she's a master bird bander and is studying post-release survival on commonly hand-reared orphan backyard birds, and she is a current member of the National Wildlife Rehabilitation Association and the International Wildlife Rehabilitation Council. So without further ado, welcome, Halley. I'm going to go ahead and make it so you can share your presentation here.
Unmute. All right. Hi, everyone. Thanks for coming. I really don't want to be talking at you, but talking with you. So please, if you have questions, put them in the comments section or the chat, and Lauren's going to help me answer questions as I go through tonight. I'm going to pre-apologize for my cat that has the zoomies right now. And so if you hear loud meowing, she's very vocal. And also my tortoise feels like he wants to dig to China. So if you hear scratching in the background, I'm not holding anyone hostage. It's just my tortoise that's feeling very active at this moment. So I'm going to go ahead and share my screen if I can figure this all out.
And then, Halley, I apologize. As you're presenting, if someone enters the waiting room, you may have to admit them for me.
Okay, I don't have a problem with that.
Cool. Otherwise, I will watch the chat, everyone. So if you have a question, feel free to drop it in there, and I'll make sure to ask her if we get a second. Otherwise, we'll also have some questions at the end.
It keeps wanting to do that. Let me move this thing out of my way. All right, so we already got that my name is Halley, and I have a bachelor's of science in biology. I'm a certified veterinary technician, a certified wildlife rehabilitator, and after taking some courses in traditional Chinese veterinary medicine for the veterinary technician, without a lot of opportunities for certification in that, I actually became certified in equine sports medicine, which is more of an acupressure situation. So a lot of people ask me, how did I get into the field? I was not one of those kids that was like, I want to grow up to be a veterinarian. But I did know that I wanted to work in the sciences, and I wasn't even sure that what I wanted to do in the sciences. So I went to Lewis and Clark College. I have my Bachelor of Science in Biology. And while I was there, my first semester, one of my professors said, "What's that at the window?" And I looked really quickly and the bird flew off. And at that moment, he decided that I was going to be a birder and he was going to cultivate that in me. So he turned me into a bird nerd. And from that point on, I became very interested in birds. And after my sophomore year in college, I needed an internship. So the only opportunity really to work with birds way back then, and I look a lot older than I am, was working at a wildlife rehabilitation center. And my screen keeps wanting to jump forward. So I apologize for that because I didn't set it to time to do that, but it keeps doing it. So I'll just backtrack every so often. But so I started interning at the Portland Audubon Society's Wildlife Care Center in Portland, Oregon. And I actually interned there for 2 years straight and got a lot of experience working with a lot of different animals. And it was great. but I still didn't think I wanted to be in the veterinary field. And I started a master's program and worked actually under the mentorship of Dr. John Marsloff, as well as a few other people, and studying birds in the field. Unfortunately, some things fell through at that point, and that's when I went into the veterinary field, starting as a kennel assistant and working my way up from kennel assistant, receptionist. I became a tech assistant, and then I ventured back east. And that's when I actually decided I wasn't going to be in the animal care field. And I had a small period of time where I decided I was going to be a computer nerd. And I started a program in graphics design at the Rhode Island School of Design. And it's only because an old application on file at Franklin Park Zoo was pulled that I actually came back into the animal care fields. And I was hired as a temporary hospital keeper at the Franklin Park Zoo in Boston. And all of a sudden, it re-inspired my desire to work with animals. And I became a certified veterinary technician while working there. But the big thing people would always ask me, what is your favorite animal? And I'm working with zoo animals. So everybody's thinking I'm going to say like chimpanzees or giraffes or lions. And I was like, crows. It's crows. And they're like, but you work with all these things. And I realized I really liked our North American native wildlife best. And that's when I decided that I wanted to work in wildlife rehabilitation. And I think I need to let somebody in. Is that what the more is right there? Nope, maybe not. Sorry. Hang on just a second. Let me move that out of the way. I don't know if you can see the things I'm trying to move out of the way. So now that I'm in wildlife rehabilitation, people ask me, what is a typical day like? And I'm going to say, no 2 days are ever the same. There's nothing typical about a day in wildlife rehabilitation. I can get over 100 different species. I can see over 1,000 animals. Hold that thought for just a second. My cat just jumped in with my tortoise. Una, out.
That sounds like a problem.
She just jumped back out. She likes the heat source, so I can't entirely blame her, but if I'm not looking, she thinks she can play with the tortoise, and he really doesn't appreciate that. So, like I said, no 2 days are ever alike. At our facility, we see about 1,000 animals a year, representing close to 100 different species. We also have over 100 volunteers, interns. So we're working with such a variety of people and animals that it's really hard to say what a typical day would be like. From injured box turtles to injured cottontails. We do a lot of holistic medicine at our facility. So we're really doing a lot of different things. And one day we might be doing cold laser therapy. The next we're preparing for the release of a mourning dove. So there really isn't anything that makes 2 days alike. And that's one of the unique things about working in wildlife rehabilitation. We have to wear so many hats. We are answering the phones and triaging over the phone. We are triaging in person as animals are admitted to our facility. We have to not just work with 100 different species, but different ailments, different ages of animals. We have to be nutritionists. We have to be nurses. We have to be mathematicians. And so we have to wear all these hats. And in many wildlife rehabilitation settings, we have to constantly be training a potentially unskilled workforce and ensuring while training these people that we're meeting the specialized needs of all of these different animals in our care. And ultimately, having to prepare these animals for release into the wild in a condition that will optimize their chances of survival. And that means surviving without any further assistance from humans and maintaining a fear of humans. So imagine raising an animal from a neonatal state to release and making sure it has all those skills to survive on its own and a fear of humans. And that's a challenge. And that's one of probably the biggest challenges for us. So what is the hardest part about my job? The people. And I don't want to say that in a negative way, because it's not the volunteers, it's not the interns. There's so much information on the internet now, and a lot of it is counterproductive to the animals. It's not the, sorry, it's going to go back and play this a few more times. It's that well-meaning person on the end of the phone who had that animal for 3 weeks that makes the job a challenge, because sometimes they've had it so long, by the time they brought it to you, it's beyond your ability to care for it. And the most humane thing that you can do for that animal is euthanize it. And you know in your head, had they brought it to you on day 1, you might have been able to save it. And that's the hardest part, because you don't want to chastise that person. You want to inspire and encourage them to do better next time. So I find that to be the most challenging part, is balancing that. How I handle phone calls 14 years ago when I started at the North Carolina Zoo's Wildlife Center is very different than how I handle them now. I try to remember that every person that calls cares, and that they may not have done everything right before that phone call, but as they call that moment in time, they're trying to do right now. And that's the biggest challenge, is trying to encourage them to do right as you move forward. You can't change what they did in the past, but you can inspire to do better next time. So we have to be role models. We have to encourage people. We have to set the example. So if they feel chastised, if they feel like they did everything wrong, you have to remember next time, they're not going to bring you that animal. If they feel like you were mean to them or were teaching them a lesson, they're not going to do right next time. So even if that animal is beyond repair, you have to be kind, you have to thank them, and you have to remember that this moment in time will change how they act in the future. Our behaviors impact those around us, human and animal kind. And the kinder we are to the people that meant well and did wrong makes a difference in the big picture. And like I said, 15 years ago, I probably would have chastised them. I would have been like, oh my God, you killed this animal. But I don't do that. I've learned from my mistakes, and I've learned from the people around me. Every intern, every volunteer that has taken time out of their day, out of their life to help us, help our native wildlife, has taught me a lesson too. And I think that's a very important way of looking at it. So while they might be the hardest part of my job, they are actually the most rewarding part of my job too. And let's be honest, animal people are not people. It's one of the hardest parts of our job, but we love what we do. And we have to remember that every animal person loves what they do too. Sorry, it keeps doing that. And every day I learn something new. Every person I interact with, I learn something new. I love that there are no 2 days that are the same. 12 years ago, we weren't doing bear cubs, but working with our Wildlife Resources Commission over the course of time, showing that we are a profession and not a hobby, that we are contributing to the science of the field, opened a lot of doors for us. So about 5 years ago, we started to do black bear rehabilitation. And we're only one of 2 facilities in North Carolina that's allowed to do black bears. And we've learned a lot through them. Also through working with the International Wildlife Rehabilitation Council, I'm an instructor and I've taught courses from Sacramento to Singapore. And I found that teaching nationally and internationally that the principles of wildlife rehabilitation are the same. Whether you're working with a primate or a squirrel, they're still rehabilitating for return to the wild, once again with that optimizing their condition for post-release survival. So while you do need to know the species specifics, their nutrition, what medications you can or can't give, those principles are still the same no matter where you are. And working with International Wildlife Rehabilitation Council actually led to me being a consultant for Wild Sun Rescue Center in Costa Rica. And I've been down there twice to help with their program down there, help set up their veterinary clinic, help them with their rehabilitation protocols, mentor vet students down there. And we have an ongoing working relationship. They'll WhatsApp me when they have questions. So I love that I'm constantly being challenged. There's a network of rehabilitators globally, and we all are looking to do the same thing, care about the wildlife in our own backyards. And whether our backyard is Costa Rica or North Carolina, we still need to inspire other people to care about those animals.
Okay, Halley, we have our first question.
Oh, good. I love questions.
What was the most unusual animal that you have worked with?
So for me, my favorite case was we got a wood stork in several years ago. It was a second-year bird that had a broken wing. And so our veterinary residents had to pin this bird's wing. And it was an interesting case in that it was one of my fails initially, in that I didn't know that they were listed as endangered in the state of North Carolina because they're not federally listed. So there's a whole bunch of things that happen when you have endangered species in care. Do you have the permits? Have you notified the right authorities? I had done none of those things. And so I was like, oops, my bad. So there was a little bit of backtracking. Well, when it came time for release, the population had migrated out of the state. So now this became a multi-state, multi-agency coordinated effort. So we were talking with Wildlife Resources Commission, our state biologists. We were talking with U.S. Fish and Wildlife. We were talking with South Carolina biologists. And also one of the unique things about our wildlife center is we're part of a zoo. So that opens a lot of doors for us in that situation. So now I have this wood stork who's huge. How do you transport it for release? Well, because we're a zoo, we actually have transport crates for cranes. So we could walk this bird into a transport crate. We got all the interagency permission. We got even a specially permitted ban to ban this bird. And we drove 5 hours one way to release this bird where there was a known population in South Carolina. And we were met by Fish and Wildlife and state biologists there. And it was really just an amazing thing to open up this huge crate that this bird could stand in and have it walk out the crate and fly into a flock of wood storks. The other thing was that bird would not eat dead fish. So zookeepers, volunteers, people in the area fished for us and caught us live fish so we could keep this bird in fish while it was in our care.
Wow, that's awesome. It sounds like you are constantly learning in your position.
Well, and that's one of the things, and actually brings me to Nebraska Wildlife Rehab, is that I'm no expert on everything. Like I said, I have over 100 different species. So it's really important to ask, to network with each other. You know, I will remember getting some shrews in. I'd never admitted shrews. And I immediately texted Laura and asked her, what to do. What do I feed them? We have to also be humble enough to know what we don't know and ask for help. And that's what's really important in this community of wildlife rehabilitators. Once again, nationally and internationally, is to ask for help, to learn, to admit that you've made mistakes, because that's how we grow and learn. There are a lot of important skills for being in this field. We have to be rehabilitators. We have to look at all of these different species. So I take care of mammals, birds, herps. I have to know what species can take what kind of meds. I need to know what an average heart rate would be for some of these species. We are now taking rabies species in. I can't even when I worked in the veterinary field. So I have worked in small animal, zoo, a little bit of large animal. I have not done any farm animal. I've done emergency and critical care, and I've done exotic medicine. And I still feel most challenged in wildlife, because what sets it apart from all other things is that preparing for release, and that these are wild animals from start to finish. And so they're not comforted by us at all. The more we handle these animals, the more we can stress them to the point of death. And then there's all these other skills that you wouldn't think about. So what's pictured here is I'm actually what's called imping a bird. I call it crafting for critters. And what it is basically taking donor feathers from a deceased bird and fusing them into the feather shaft of the living bird. And that way you can release them sooner than waiting for a full molt. But you have to be very careful when you do this. You have to have the right gender, which many of our birds are not sexually dimorphic, so you can't tell the gender apart. If you have even one feather slightly askew, it can affect their ability to fly. They will molt these donor feathers out when they're ready to molt. So it acts as a natural feather, but you have to, once again, really make sure that you know what you're doing. So we actually work a lot at our facility with Carolina Raptor Center, and they will, if I need a donor bird that I haven't kept, we do keep donor wings and tails in our freezer, but they deal with raptors so much more frequently than us. So if I need a different donor bird, I will, get a weight, get pictures, get measurements of the bird that I have, and text their vet and see if they have anything that matches if we don't. It's done under anesthesia. So you do see the birds under anesthesia. The face is covered here. We do wrap talons because we don't want anybody to accidentally get taloned, even if the bird is under anesthesia. We're actually, I don't know if you can tell in this picture, but the bird is being monitored with the Doppler so that we can make sure while under anesthesia. And we have to be quick with anesthesia too. So things that you might be able to do on a wake pet, or even an awake zoo animal, like zoo animals are trained for voluntary participation in things. Hang on just a second. Cat, get off. Sorry, my cat is just ridiculous. And getting into things she never gets into. So there are a whole bunch of skill sets that you would never think of that we have to deal with in this field. And that's what makes it so unique, but so rewarding at the same time. So a lot of people ask me if they're going to get into this field, what are things that they would do? What should I tell them to do? And I would say the first thing that I would always advise is a love for animals is very different than a love for working with animals. Okay, working with animals is messy, it's smelly, it's hard. You have to be indoors, outdoors. For us at our facility, it can be really slow one day and well-staffed, and the next day you could be, all of your volunteers and interns could have called out and you're on your own with 65 animals in care. So make sure it's not just a love for animals. and how you make sure that volunteer, intern, shadow. Get some experience. Make sure it's a right fit for you. There are things also in wildlife rehabilitation that you wouldn't think of, but to prepare a barred owl for release, I have to feed it live prey. I can't release an animal in good conscience that can't find its own food. So I have to raise colonies of mice to feed to this owl live. So one rule of thumb, don't name the feeder mice, because then we all get a little attached, and we already ended up with Ratzilla, Rat Daddy, Daisy the rat, and I finally stopped raising rats because people were getting more attached to the rats than they were the mice. And one thing I also learned, make sure they're all brown or black, because if people can identify them differently than the rest, they get attached to the cute mice that are different colors. And then I can't do it. I can't feed it. Once it's been named, I just can't. I feel horrible. So those get sent home to people as pets. We also don't name our wildlife patients, and there's several reasons for that. First and foremost, I never want to give the perception that a wild animal is a pet. Second of all, we don't talk to our patients. They don't benefit from that. I talked about the stress of a wild animal in human care. And if it had a name, it would be a lot harder to not speak to it. I know that every time one of those rats got named, I was like, hey, Ratzilla, what's up? Hey, Rat Daddy, what you doing? We have resident animals that act as fosters or ambassadors, and I talk to them all the time. So I need to not talk to our wildlife, and it would be harder if they had names. And the other thing is, at the end of the day, we can't save everything. And we have to stay emotionally detached. And that's another thing that separates wildlife rehabilitation from other animal care fields, that detachment. And that sounds really bad as animal lovers. But once again, it's not that I just love animals, I love working with them. And one of the things that I want to be able to do is give them the gift of euthanasia. I never want an animal to suffer under my watch, under my care. That's a horrible feeling. If an animal dies in our care, and I would rather it have been euthanized than wonder the moments that led up to the death in human care. And that's a really difficult thing. And a lot of people think wouldn't that be the worst part of the job? And I like I said, I don't think it is, because it's a gift I can give. I think about every animal that comes into our center. It's a second chance. And it's an opportunity for them to have a humane death versus starving in pain on the side of the road where they were hit. We can give that gift of ending suffering. And to me, that's a wonderful opportunity. Also, and this might sound a little morbid, but for every deceased animal, it's a teaching opportunity. For that volunteer or intern, I'd rather teach them how to give an injection on a deceased animal than a living one. It's an opportunity to teach somebody how to properly handle a bird of prey before they handle a living one, or how to bandage a wound. So that gift of making sure that they're not suffering also becomes a teaching opportunity. Obviously, release is the ultimate goal, and we work towards that from start to finish. So those parting words, in a sense, are really, make sure that this is a good fit for you. If you're going into the veterinary care field, make sure that you actually understand, and this is going to sound really horrible, animals hate veterinarians. True story. No animal is like, yay, I'm going to the vet. So that actually came up as a veterinary resident at our zoo. Had never thought about that. She realized the backup beep of the zoo's vet truck right across the board stressed the animals out. So they never looked forward to seeing her. And that really bummed her out. She really loves working with the animals, but they really don't love working with her. So our zoo vets then will really work towards voluntary participation in procedures and being more positive and making sure they show up at these animal enclosures and working with the keepers. So it wasn't always negative. But that's a thing to be aware of, that at least in wildlife rehabilitation too, these animals aren't going to be like, hey, thanks. And we don't want them to say, hey, thanks. We want to make sure that they don't appreciate us because we're maintaining wild behaviors. So one of the other things, and I forgot to mention this before, as a master bird bander, we do post-release survival studies of commonly hand-reared birds at the Wildlife Center, and we band all of our birds post-release. And for me, going back to one of my favorite things is knowing scientifically that we're doing things right. And that has been an amazing thing for me. We have currently, I actually do talk to him because he's free-ranging wildlife now, a Carolina Wren. He's green, white, white, because those are his color bands. And he has been wild and free for almost 2 years now. He was hand-reared at the center from a nestling. He was released. We actually only saw him like once a week for the first like 6 months. And then the first winter, he started realizing completely on his own that we toss out leftover mealworms and seed in what we call our bird feeder area. And he started noticing that, and he actually recognized my shirt and my pigtails. And so, not having been habituated while in human care, he's actually become marginally habituated while in the wild. He doesn't let us touch him. He doesn't let us approach him, but he recognizes he's smart enough survival skills to notice that we do this. He actually hangs out at our back dock and waits for people to service the mealworms every day. And like I said, this is not something we conditioned. We actually documented that we didn't see him very frequently initially. And this is something that he learned on his own as a wild survival skill. He's raised, I don't know if it's a he. I always call it a he. I think it's a he because he's been seen feeding 2 clutches of fledglings, but he wasn't gone enough for me to think that he was incubating a nest. Another thing that sounds horrible, but we got in a deceased Fredbellied Woodpecker that had bands. It was a bird we hand raised 4 years ago. Survived 4 years in the wild. It was found on the furthest part of the park. Unfortunately, it had been a window strike, but that data helped, you know, when we release animals, we don't know what happens. We'd like to think we did a good job. We like to think that we did right by these animals, but we don't know. So anything that we can contribute to improve our care of these animals or to confirm that we're doing it right is great. It's science, and we need to be contributing more. This used to be a hobby for a lot of people, wildlife rehabilitation, but it has evolved into a profession. And anything that we can contribute to that profession is great. So
those are some pretty cool anecdotes.
Yeah, so now's the Q&A portion. I really encourage people to ask questions, make comments. I still don't know what this more 6 at the bottom means. Oh, maybe it's in the chat. There.
It's potentially the chat. We had a couple questions I can relay to you. First of all, Skylar wanted to say he has also made the mistake of naming his feeder animals.
Yeah, see, I try. It's usually a volunteer intern, but then I become attached.
Right.
Like Rat Daddy. Then we had Esky. We went through so many rats, and I was like, oh God, I have to stop getting rats because I'm getting attached. And it's hard. Compassion fatigue, for those of you that aren't familiar, is very real in wildlife rehabilitation. Like I said, a lot of the animals that we come in have to be euthanized. You have an ever-changing dynamic of animals and humans. You know, I get attached to my volunteers and interns, and for everyone that leaves, I wonder, did I do something wrong? Could I have done better by them? For every animal that dies, I personally go, could I have done better? I should have euthanized that animal. So compassion fatigue can be really hard. So having a resident, having a pet rat can sometimes be an important part of your day. We have a crow at the Wildlife Center. His name is Marzloff. He actually raises the baby crows for us. He's a great foster dad. I talk to him all day. He's nicknamed Best Friend, and I come into the center every morning and I go, hey, best friend, how's it going? And he's gotten to actually know the sound of my car pulling up, and he'll start vocalizing when I pull up. And it's the perfect way to start every day.
Oh my gosh, crows are so smart. Okay,
Yes.
so we have Nick asked, is there a way that people could find out more about your clinic?
Sorry. More about my clinic. Yes. nczoo.org. And then I think we're in the animal welfare section. I was never really sure why, but you can also Google NC Zoo Wildlife Rehab, and there's information. We do have an internship. Right now, unfortunately, is very challenging because of COVID. So we're a state facility and we have been closed since March. And it's been absolutely breaking my heart because I think about all the animals that need us that we can't help. We've not been permitted to have volunteers or interns in state buildings, and we are a state building. And while we were able to take care of some black bear cubs and some otters and some animals that were found on grounds this year, because we still work with Wildlife Resources Commission, we haven't been able to really, because it's just me and one other person, be able to care for the number of animals we normally would. So, but yeah, we're hoping. I've been fighting the fight to have interns and volunteers back since the day they told us we couldn't have them. So my hope is that we can start again sooner now that vaccines have rolled out. Fingers crossed. Everybody send some good juju my way. I miss our volunteers and interns so much. I miss our animals so much. So, but yes, if you want to find out more, nczoo.org. It could be /wildlife. Just Google NC Zoo Wildlife Rehab Center.
And who's ever interested in that, I went ahead and put that URL in the chat, so you guys should have it.
We also have a Facebook page, I should say too.
Oh,
so
yes.
That's NC Zoo WRC is our Facebook page.
That
I have a little Trivia Tuesday thing going on.
Nice. That's awesome. So our next question is, how can I rehab animals? Is there a certain training or what sort of education would you suggest?
All right. So the first thing is to find out what your state laws are. Mammals and herps are regulated on the state level. Birds are regulated on the federal level. Once you figure out those things, the first thing I would say, if you have no experience, find out where you can volunteer. Get some hands-on experience. If you're looking for a career in wildlife rehabilitation, getting an internship, definitely if you are a veterinary technician or going down that route, it seems that most places that are hiring are going to hire somebody that's a vet tech, or there is a certification program. It's the Certified Wildlife Rehabilitator. It's an exam. You can go to cwrexam.org to find out about the exam. I mentor a lot of people, and I'm always happy. Anyone can email me. Also, after this, anytime, ask me questions. I'm happy to set you up. If you're not in North Carolina or Nebraska, I might be able to help you find a reputable wildlife facility or individual in the state that you're in. Because like I said, networking is so key that I know probably someone in every state that could help you out. But the CWR, there's a lot of also great books out there. There's the Comprehensive Approach to Wildlife Rehabilitation, which is published by IWRC. There's state organizations, and there's IWRC and NWRA, which is National Wildlife Rehabilitators Association. So those are great organizations to join, in addition to looking to see what your state organizations are. Also, there's a lot of continuing education. And I think that's really important to continue your education. So those organizations also have symposia that you can attend. I know NWRA's is going to be virtual this year, and I'm not trying to do any plugs for any particular thing, but I do know that their symposium is online. I know that there's online CE through Virginia Wildlife Center, does a wildlife care academy. So there's lots of opportunities to learn. Some states require you to be a CWR or to take the IWRC's basic course to become eligible to rehabilitate wildlife. Each state has different requirements. And actually the state of North Carolina's requirements changed January 1st, 2020. So it's also an ever evolving thing as well.
Sounds like there's a lot of opportunities.
Yes, definitely. And I can tell you right now, we need more volunteers to rehabilitate wildlife. The number of animals that need our help outnumber the number of people qualified to care for them.
Scott had said that he volunteered for you before and he is excited to be back ASAP.
Oh, yay. I recognized you. I was like, hey, that's Scott. I know him. I'd be so excited to have you back.
We have a question from Beth. She says, are there other opportunities in wildlife biology besides rehabilitation?
Yes.
That you know of?
Yes, yes, yes. And I know that you have a bunch in your series, Lauren. So that's a great way to find out what other opportunities is to register for the other talks that they're having through Nebraska Wildlife. There's checking out your local biologists, like I said, it's your Fish and Game or Wildlife Resources Commission. Oftentimes there's opportunities, seeing about local zoos, seeing what conservation opportunities. I know my zoo does hellbender work, pine barren tree frog work, that is not related to captive animals, but wildlife, and doing surveys for those. So there are lots of opportunities to work with free-ranging wildlife. If you're interested in birds, going and working with a map station that's monitoring avian productivity and survivorship. And there's a lot of map stations opportunities too, where they train you to misnet and ban birds under a master bird bander. So lots of opportunities. There's even citizen science opportunities, which might be just bird watching in your own backyard or doing some kind of count just in your neighborhood. I used to do salamander walks and count salamanders, and I did frog walks, and we count the different species of frogs by their calls. So there's lots of opportunities out there.
Awesome. So everyone, this is the last chance to answer your question. Halley, we have a couple people just want to let you know. Victoria says that you are amazing and a renowned expert, and the North Carolina Zoo is fortunate to have you.
Thank you very much.
And Angie says, I appreciate that you want to further wildlife rehab as a profession and improve the science behind what you do.
Well, thank you. I think that we all obviously care about the wildlife in our backyards, or else we wouldn't all be here tonight.
It's true, very true.
So, do you want me to type my email address? So if anybody has questions after this evening, feel free to reach out. I'm always happy to answer questions or connect you with people in your area that may be doing what you want to be doing.
Yeah, that'd be great.
And just remind me of where I met you, because sometimes I forget things. But if you email me, I do not delete emails until I've actually followed up with them. So know that It might be several days before I can, but I always will.
Awesome. Okay. Well, I don't see any other questions. So thank you from me and everyone for presenting to us tonight. And if anyone else has any other questions, you can go ahead and contact Halley at her email there, or you can contact us as well through our Facebook or website. And yeah, like Halley said, hopefully you guys will tune into some of our other talks and we'll continue talking about careers in conservation and wildlife.
Thank you, guys.
Thanks again, Halley. Thank you everyone for coming.
All right.